All right, so now that we have looked at all those elements, let's take a deeper look at how to choose a page format with accessibility in mind and to know kind of what you're getting into. So we're looking at a very similar document. Nothing has really changed, but what I'm going to do each time here is export in a different way. So for example, I've got a flipbook version. And so this has a completely different level of interactivity, right? I have this easy navigation, which is helpful, but I also have this fancy navigation, which is that I can drag these page curls around. So that's one option. And what I need to realize as I'm choosing that option is that I am making a choice for something visual, something interactive, but I'm probably sacrificing some accessibility. We won't get too deep into this, but if I inspect this, to create the geometry to do this, the output has become more complicated. There's JavaScript in here that wraps all these pages in containers and creates duplicate versions of them. So it can create this peeling and folding effect and add drop shadows. So you can see it's live updating as I'm dragging this. So this is a choice for one thing, but not for accessibility. So that same document, right? All I did when I exported this is basically to choose the flipbook format. And the only other thing I did was in the advanced, I set the scaling to best fit. And so this is going to scale to the window here. All right. So that's one possible format, just basically changing one output option. Of course, there's a variation of the slider output, or excuse me, the scrolling output that we looked at. This one doesn't have the page borders. It's just the borderless version. So I could use this to make something feel like a website. This obviously is going to be a little more accessible than the flipbook because everything is exposed on the page. It comes into focus as we scroll through. And so a screen reader is going to have a little bit easier time accessing this and a bit easier time telling where you are. I mean, that's the other thing in the navigation, the experience, right? In the flipbook, visually, I'm only looking at the spread with page 2 and 3, but that code might all be exposed to the screen reader. So those are things that you want to think about. And it's who is your primary audience? Does it absolutely have to be a flipbook? Okay, well, then you can create a flipbook, but you could add the mobile article explorer. You could think about breaking up the text frames or rendering them as live text. So you want to think about those things in parallel. Similarly, this is the slider output. So I just exported with the borderless for the previous one, and this one is the slider horizontal, I believe. So when I click this, you'll see that effect. I can swipe it as well. So you get these very different effects. And again, these are choices that you're making when you export, and you want to factor that into the importance of the accessibility and how you prioritize that. And if you're prioritizing the accessibility above the interactivity, then you might make some different choices. So for example, this is a version, I'll show you the options in a minute in InDesign, that is exported as a multi-page format. So you can see instead of index at the top, it's got 0001 HTML. And that's just loading the first page of content. And I've chosen to make the text live. So all this text is exposed to the screen reader, and in a very controlled fashion, only the text on this page is exposed. If I navigate forward, only the text and the content, the alt content, etc., of this page is exposed at one time. So it's very controlled in terms of a screen reader experience. So this is a version that I would say is more optimized for accessibility than the other 3 versions of the document, that we exported. I didn't do anything differently with this InDesign document, right? These are just export options that I chose with in5. I think I left this on one of the slider formats. You're not going to see the transition when it's multi-page, but that gives me the show back and next arrows option, which is very useful in terms of, we talked about semantics with like the H1, H2 tag. The in5 default navigation here is in a nav element. So it's very semantically clean in terms of indicating the purpose of these things. So more useful to a screen reader than custom buttons that you've created in InDesign. So that's one consideration I was making as I was trying to create this more accessible version. And then the other thing I did, which I mentioned, is to make this a multi-page web output. And because of the shape of the pages in the advanced section, I changed it to fill width. And so that's the experience then you're getting here. So those are considerations that you can make when you're choosing a page format and thinking about where your project is going to fall on that accessibility spectrum versus interactivity and layout. How are you going to find that nexus where those priorities meet for that particular project? So that's something to think about in terms of how you're choosing your page format and how you're thinking about your audience.